Hello, welcome to Talking Carpet. It's me, your host Chris Bracken. I'm here with my two friends Emma Sanders from the BBC and Philippa Smallwood, who you know from Tour and all things Liverpool. Bit of a different show today. This is a show I wasn't anticipating to ever have to do. But for those of you who aren't aware, unfortunately, we woke up to the breaking news that unfortunately Matt Beard, former Liverpool manager, sadly passed away at the age of 47. Quite unexpected news, very sad news. So we felt between the three of us, we'd like to do a bit of a tribute to Matt, to talk about him, the good times. All quite It's quite an awkward conversation, so we'll sort of see how we go. Philippa, I mean, obviously, there's no real easy way to talk about this. It was just a complete shock to such a lovely man.
Yeah, I mean, I got a message on Saturday evening, just saying I'd seen the news. I didn't know, obviously, at that point, what that news was. I thought it was that he'd potentially started a new role somewhere or something. And just in complete shock, obviously, when I read that, it was that he'd passed away. Um, you know, you don't ever expect it of someone so young. But also that, just a few weeks ago, you was seeing him running on the touchline at Burnley, and you kind of, I expected him to begin in another role, and if not relatively soon, in a few months' time, and it's just something that you just never ever expect. Yeah, and it's I don't think it's really hit me still. Obviously, I'm aware that it's happened, and you're reading all these tributes to him from players, from staff, from people within the game. People even outside of the game. Are all saying the same thing about what a fantastic man he was, and I had experience of that myself. I met him many times. Often had a chat about what had happened during the games, after the game, and he was always very charming, amenable, and he always tried to make you feel at ease. And I think that's something that I hope that we all try and do that in a lot of ways. But he just had that way about him that he would talk to you, and you automatically was just at ease in his company, and you know just his smile. I struggle a little bit to kind of understand how we've got here, really, just because of the kind of personality that he was. He always wanted everybody else to feel like, they were 10 feet tall. I know that was something that you said to me, Chris, on, yesterday. And I think that's the thing that I take away. He was somebody who always tried to make people feel better about themselves and about their life. And outside of football, I think that's absolutely huge. And his achievements on, within the women's game. He's one of the few people who's dedicated his whole career to developing, female players, and trying to develop the game as much as he can, and absolutely championing the women's game. And I've heard a lot of people say, his legacy will live on, and I think without Matt Beard, the game possibly wouldn't be where it is today. And I think that's absolutely massive.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about his legacy because as Philip says, he's a champion of women's football. He's one of the big drivers of it. But him, the person, you know, whenever I think of Matt Beard, because I used to be bumping into with my daughter, all you can remember is this big happy chappy just going, "All right, darling." That was automatically the opener. "All right, darling. All right, mate," and that was it. He was bubbly. He was life and soul of being around someone, and even if the match had been shite,
Yeah.
within 2 minutes talks about he didn't really care because he just
Yeah, no,
he just made you feel like it'll be all right.
yeah, no, he was a brilliant man, and I completely echo what Philippa said. He was someone that I considered a good friend, and it's strange in my role, obviously, as a journalist, and he was as a football manager. I'm questioning him. I'm questioning his decisions. I'm asking him about certain parts of the game. I'm, sort of maybe asking him what went wrong, what didn't. And yet he was such a special person that he understood our role and really valued us as journalists and respected us as people. And I think as soon as we left, whatever environment we were in terms of the working place, whether or not that was the media conference, whether or not that was, pitch side interviews, anything like that, he just treated us the same as he did with everyone, and I think that was his biggest trait, was that he just cared about people, full stop. He cared about developing them, he cared about protecting them, cared about making them feel at ease, like Philippa said. And yeah, I spent many moments with him outside of football, and they're the moments and the memories that I'm thinking of, and I have been over the last 48 hours. I think the news came as a massive shock to me on a personal level. I think it was really hard to kind of, fulfill my role as a journalist, because ultimately, you've got to play a role in delivering that news to people, and that was really difficult. I found that really, really hard on the night. And then, we were covering WSL games on Sunday, which was literally, nearly 12 hours or so after the news had broke, and no one cared about the football. Everyone just wanted to come together to share memories about Beardy and what a man he was and the legacy that he left. And I've been reflecting, certainly today, a bit more on, some of those happy moments. And the one I keep coming back to was actually my most recent conversation with him, which was only a week or so ago, where he sort of, called me out of the blue, and we'd been chatting for the last couple of weeks or so about how he wanted to start this podcast with me, chatting about the real issues in women's football, and he wanted to call it No Hold Bars in a Bar, which was very typical Beardy, because he wanted to be straight to the point, he wanted to be honest and genuine, but he also wanted to do it with a pint in hand at a pub, which for me sums him up. But yeah, he phoned me and he said that he'd found a cheap deal on some recording equipment on Amazon, and he sent me the link to it and said, you need to get yourself on this offer, it's brilliant, I've been practicing my podcasting. And it was just, those small little conversations that I'll really miss having with him. But it just summed him up. Like, he was like an excitable kid at times. Like, he wanted to boast about how the fact he'd found this cheap deal. And yeah, it's made me laugh when I've thought about that particular conversation several times today. And yeah, that was just a very normal conversation with him, really. He was extremely funny, he was extremely caring. Yeah, he was just a beautiful man.
Yeah, he was. I mean, listen, my memories are always connected to my daughter with him, because I know post COVID, I think Olivia took a little bit of time to get used to life at post COVID, and he got wind of it from half a conversation with me, and it was like a passing comment, and he made a beeline for her and just made her feel 10 foot tall. So, you get back into your football, you'll be boss. You tell me how you're getting on. You tell me what positions you're playing. I give her a couple of tips, and she felt like the world was like, this is amazing. This is the manager of Liverpool, just comes and talks to me. And to Olivia, that was her world. She was just like, and he wasn't just Olivia, he did that with loads of young fans and old fans as well, to be fair. He just made you feel like in that moment, you were the centre and you were the special one. He didn't want to talk about the fact, he'd probably had like a grueling, long day, tough training sessions, horrible result possibly sometimes, or a good result. He's like, doesn't matter. Let's focus on what makes you smile. And that testament comes out, Emma Philippa, in the people who've talked about him, because it's not just former players, former staff. It's players and managerial clubs that he technically has no connection to. Like the Arsenal fullback McCabe, talk glowingly about him, but he's never managed Arsenal, But everyone thought about it. I think the former Arsenal manager spoke very glowingly about him, didn't he, Emma, saying, sort of made, he's a very good connector, I think is how he described him.
Yeah, connector. Yeah, it was Jonas said about, it was about a year ago now. I think we asked him, whether there was still the kind of tradition in the what we've known to see in the men's game, where some managers might invite the other manager to their office to have a drink. Arsene Wenger was quite infamously one of them, obviously the former Arsenal men's manager. So for Jonas Eidevall, who was the Arsenal women's manager at the time, to be invited into Matt Beard's office, if you like, I don't think you could even go as far as calling it an office in those days, was a testament to him, because I think the quote he said was, "We don't all do it, but Matt Beard did." And Renee Slegers, now the current Arsenal women's manager, did actually use that same comment on Sunday, and she was one of those who was also invited to the room, and they would have a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of scotch, whatever it might be, and they'd just have a conversation about football, about life. And and Jonas used to call it Matt and his room, Matt and his office. He touched everyone in the game because he was there for so long. It was the longevity that is, gone hand in hand with the successes that he's had throughout his career. But that longevity and that ability to be the same person the whole way through, I think, was such a special skill. And everybody who came up against him, Gareth Taylor, the current Liverpool women's manager, who was at Manchester City, had only ever known him as an opponent. And, he's said some nice words today on the Liverpool website. So I think everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew what they got with Beardy. He was straight to the point, told it how it was. And I think everyone kind of loved him for that, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I mean, obviously, we're very Liverpool centric, but it's a 16-year career that he's had. I think it was at Millwall. He did work for Chelsea, Liverpool twice, Boston Breakers. Got West Ham to their first ever FA Cup final. Took over on an interim basis at Bristol. He took Liverpool to 2 league titles. Still the only Liverpool manager to do this, and then came back and within first season got Liverpool promoted out of the Championship, which had been a painful process the year or so before, and did it at a canter, and then made Liverpool an established WSL side. His legacy, I think, will never be forgotten. He possibly will get maybe a bit more recognition. There are some journalists I've read who felt he probably didn't get as much recognition he deserved because of how much of a pioneer he was. Maybe even overlooked internationally for some roles, because he just was. But I just think everyone knew if Matt Beard was your manager, everyone bought into his ethos, and everyone knew they were in for a tough time.
I think it says a lot that so many players have played for him several times as well.
Yeah.
I think you don't often get that where players are willing to follow a manager to several clubs, and it's happened time and time again. I don't think I've ever heard a player have a bad word to say about him. And don't get me wrong, not all of them will think of him as glowingly as as I do, as some of us do. But that happens when you've got somebody who's telling you doing things wrong. But I think to have so many players who kind of buy into your ethos, and that is basically what it is when you manage a football club. They need to buy into your way of working, and the camaraderie that you have within a squad. And I would say that that season that we got promoted from the Championship is probably my favourite ever season, both men and women.
That Bristol game, Philippa.
That Bristol, it'll live long in the memory. Traveling down to Bristol and kind of knowing that, if you win that game, you're getting promoted, and it was just one big party that day.
Just on that, Philippa, sorry to interrupt you, but one of the memories that comes to my head when you mention that game is actually like post-match. I'd brought a bottle of Prosecco, just a cheap one from around the corner, just before the game, because obviously, we knew there was a high chance that Liverpool would win, the title that day and be able to lift the trophy. And I thought Beardy would want to celebrate on the bus on the way back, so I brought in this bottle of Prosecco, and his very typically funny response was, "Is that it?" 5 or 6 bottles. So I just wanted to share that memory because it just popped in my head then when you were talking about that game.
Yeah, and I seem to remember obviously, like the club did a fantastic job as well for that game, because I think they put on 2 coaches. We had the ragamuffins on the coach on the way back, as a celebration, and it was. I don't think any of that would have happened without Birdie leading the side. There's question marks whether or not we would have actually got promoted. He knew exactly the sort of players that needed to come in order to achieve that. But like I say, it just felt like it was one big family. We were kind of like an extension of the team in a way. There was this core group of fans that was going, to all the away games as well as the home games, and it just kind of built throughout the season. And then obviously after the season ended, we ended up, with the one and only time I think any women's team's ever been on a parade, like a full scale parade. And I was one of the lucky people who got to go on that parade, and it was, for me, that's the thing that I'll always remember, being on that coach, that bus, and I'll never forget it. I don't know what the men's coach was like, the men's bus, but literally the women finished off all the alcohol on that on that bus within like about half of the journey. It was just absolutely mad, but it was just a special time. And it'd have been nice if we'd have had a happier ending at Liverpool for him. Last season didn't go as any of us hoped it would. And that is a real shame, but I don't think it'll ever diminish, the achievements that he had at Liverpool, to win 2 WSL titles, like we say, to get us back into the WSL after, what was essentially an absolute mess of a club at that point. And then to keep us established as a WSL side, I don't think that should ever be underestimated. And I struggle really to kind of. I always envisaged that it might even return a third time. You'd
have put a bet on it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, there's not that many roles within the women's game, and sometimes you just feel like somebody needs maybe a bit of a break from something to kind of like refresh themselves and kind of get that mojo back in a way. And I don't know, I just kind of had this feeling that in a few years' time, when maybe things were a little bit better at the club again, that he might return one more time to us. But yeah, it's sad. It's just very, very sad that we'll never see him on a touchline again. The women's game will be a poorer place for not having Birdie within the game anymore.
Yeah, we're going to miss his competitive nature, aren't we, Emma? Because as much as he was lovely and bubbly, and we all, as a person, he's great. He took no prisoners on the pitch. He took absolutely no prisoners, and you knew you were in for a battle with him. And I'm sure managers knew that as well. I think he gave Liverpool that edge that you needed sometimes. That where people and Emma Hayes famously did not like travelling away to Liverpool because she'd make excuses for the crowd. I just don't think she liked how Liverpool played because they made them fight and made it difficult. And sometimes, if you've had long European trips, the last thing you want is, I don't want Liverpool away. This is the last thing I need. And that's what he made it. He made Liverpool away the one that everyone didn't want. You're like, I could do without this. And that's credit to him.
I mean, Birdie went to battle in boardrooms to improve everything for the players, and they went to battle for him when they stepped onto the pitch. I think that was a reflection of their respect for him as a manager, but more importantly, their respect for him as a person, and the fact that he always had everyone else's needs in the back of his mind, and everything he did, every single action he did, conversation he had, it's really nice to hear what you were saying about his interactions with Olivia, your daughter. I just think like that just sums him up. Like that would have just been a subconscious thing for him, but yet also very deliberate. Like he would have known what he was doing in that moment. He would have known the impact that those conversations would have had on Olivia. And I think that was a reflection in his team's performances. And it was used as a criticism at some points, that his pragmatic kind of, some people would describe it as a defensive and organised style. I think sometimes maybe that's what people said held him back a little bit, but I actually think it was one of his biggest skills was basically getting every single inch out of his team. And yes, it didn't always work, but quite clearly he goes down as Liverpool's most successful women's manager by a significant mile. So clearly it paid off and it had very good results. You think back to when he took over as interim manager at Bristol City. He was covering Tanya Oxtoby, who was on maternity leave, and he was a double WSL winning manager, and he was prepared to drop down to a team who were literally fighting relegation because he recognised that they were a club who needed somebody experienced. Tanya was one of the first managers really to go through that kind of maternity leave process. And I think Beardy just loved the fact that that was a club that were allowing her to do that. So he thought, that's a club that I want to go and help out. And so he did. So I think he was able to get the best out of his players because of who he was and because of what he stood for. And those kind of no-nonsense, hard-tackling, organised teams was a reflection of that, and also a reflection of kind of his contrast in that he was, a giant teddy bear. He was a lovable man. He was, just a family man from London who used to make jokes and chatting Cockney slang to wind everyone up. But when he got on the football pitch, all he wanted to do was win. All he wanted to do was berate the officials and scream at his players and make sure that they were working hard. So, he was a character on the touchline, I think is probably the way to describe him.
But I think that's how he made, especially at Prenton Park, it's such a fortress, because I think you saw almost like you see Beardy fighting for you, and that probably made the crowd more ferocious to make it a bit of a bear pit. That it made things more difficult for the opposition. You got everyone to buy in. It's kind of a thing with Matt Beard. I think in the men's game, Klopp had this, is that we're all in this, so we all buy in and we all do it as one. And that's not an easy thing to do, because not every manager can do that. It's a hard act to follow. I think the current manager, it's a hard act to follow. And he has his own way and he'll do things his own way. But I'm with Philippa. There was always that thought back in there going, I can see Beardy being back in a few years' time. Why? Because I just think he will be, because he's just a really good manager as well.
He's just Liverpool, isn't he? I think when I think when you think of Beardy, he had like you say, a long career, and you forget about some of the clubs that he was involved in and he worked for, because the first thing that comes to your mind is Liverpool. And I know it does for us because we're Liverpool fans, but whenever you speak to anybody else, the first thing they'll think of is Liverpool and his achievements at Liverpool. One of the first things that I remember with Beardy, because unfortunately when we won the WSL, I wasn't going to the games at that point, so I didn't really know him from that time. But I did watch the BBC program that he did when he was at West Ham, Squad Goals, and it was a really interesting. Anybody who's interested in football, in documentaries, and fly on the walls and all that sort of thing, I would recommend trying to watch it. I hope the BBC put it back on again.
It should be on iPlayer.
Yeah, it was a fantastic watch. You got to see how he interacted both with the club and with his players, and what he was about, really. And it was a fantastic watch, and it was the first time I got to actually see Grace Fisk as well.
When you think about it, from that documentary, Leanne Keane and Grace Fisk, Jill Flaherty all ended up for Liverpool, and as Jill Flaherty said, I'd follow him to the end of the earth.
And this is the thing, players continually would follow him to different clubs, and they wouldn't do that if they didn't like working for him and didn't appreciate how he made them feel. And I think it was more than just the football inside. It was very much, he put their well-being above his own.
Having Jazz and Yana followed him to about 3 clubs now. As an example,
they were at Bristol and then they came to Liverpool.
Mel Lawley literally she dropped from WSL Everton, where she was playing and she was getting minutes, to the third tier to play with him at Burnley. I think that goes to show that, she trusted him so much that she was kind of willing to give up WSL football for a season to go and join him at Burnley.
Yeah, I think that's a massive credit to him. I don't think there's many people that would get that from players, that buy-in. So yeah, it's just an incredibly sad time, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure how his family can deal with it. To be honest, I'm struggling. I know we're all struggling in different ways, to come to terms with the news. My heart goes out to them, because it's just an incredibly difficult thing to have to deal with. And Wednesday and the weekend for me, when Liverpool play, is going to be incredibly difficult, I think, to get through. But we will get through it, and we'll do him proud, hopefully.
I think so, yeah. Emma, any last words before we go out from here?
Well, I think, I reflected on the weekend after, having a really tough sort of day on the Sunday, getting back into WSL football. As Philippa says, he would have wanted us to sort of carry on with things, whether that's work, whether that's going as a fan, whether that's playing, whether that's coaching, all the different roles within the game. He wanted the absolute best product to be, on show every single week. So it was that. I think that was something I took away from the weekend, seeing the likes of Olivia Smith and Taylor Hines playing for Arsenal in really difficult circumstances. The likes of Scott Rogers, who was obviously his former assistant at Liverpool, stood on the touchline with Mark Skinner as an assistant at Manchester United on Sunday. And actually, Mark Skinner said some really powerful words in his, media conference, which was that Beardy's legacy will live on, because we will all talk about it, and we'll all talk about the impact that he's had. And I think, while it's been emotional, it's been difficult, I think I've enjoyed today reflecting on him and talking about that, because I think that message rang true with me, that Mark Skinner had said that, I think it is important that we talk about him and we talk about his role in the game. So yeah, that would be my message to everyone else is, please share your memories, please share your thoughts, because, we all want to hear them. It's heartwarming to hear how well respected and loved he was around the football world. And as Philippa says, it will be difficult for a lot of people, but it's one of the beauty of football, that there's a ready-made family there waiting to support you all and to listen. So use it.
Yeah, nice words there. So on that note, I think we'll say goodbye. But listen, Matt Beard will go down as a legend in women's football. He is a pioneer of women's football, but more importantly, he was just a lovely man, absolutely fantastic man. And all we can say is thank you, Matt. We will miss you, and we all love you very much. But listen, that's me. That's me from the Talkin. Thank you, Philippa. Thank you, Emma. We'll be back very, very soon.